Hey guys, tonight we're setting sail on a journey through time. A journey to the untamed world of 17th century pirate ships. Picture yourself aboard one of those creaky, weather-beaten vessels, swaying with the rhythm of the waves. The salty breeze hits your face, and you hear the distant calls of gulls as they wheel overhead. You might smell the faint scent of tar and old wood mixed with the heavy, almost metallic tang of the sea. And just beneath it all, underneath the briny air, there's the subtle, ever-present scent of sweat and wet leather, clinging to the crew, who are crammed in tight quarters below deck. Now, I have to say, don't get too excited just yet. You're not exactly cruising the Caribbean in search of treasure like the movies tell you. In fact, you'd probably be lucky to survive this. There are no grand feasts or sparkling jewels to be found here. Just the constant clatter of chains, the creak of wood, and the gnawing realization that you're stuck in a world of hard labor and peril. Life aboard a pirate ship isn't as glamorous as the legends make it seem, trust me. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, if you want to share where you are and what time it is, go ahead. I'd love to know where you're tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. As the ship lurches beneath your feet, we're going to step into a world where survival was anything but certain, and every day felt like a battle against the elements, the enemy, and your very own crew. Let's begin then. Welcome aboard. Now that we've set the scene, let's step below deck and take a closer look at what life was like in the cramped, damp, and generally unpleasant belly of a pirate ship. If you think you can picture it well, you probably can't, at least not fully. The air is thick with moisture, and the smell of unwashed bodies, sea salt, and mold. The constant sound of the ship creaking and groaning as it moves through the waves is a familiar lullaby to the men living in the hold. But it's not the kind of soothing, rhythmic creak you might imagine when you think of a peaceful night at sea. No, it's more of a constant, disconcerting noise, as if the ship itself is slowly falling apart and you're trapped inside it. There's hardly any space to move around. The ship's hold is a cramped, dark labyrinth of barrels, ropes, and hammocks. There's no privacy here. Everyone sleeps in close quarters, swaying gently in the rhythm of the ocean. Your hammock is just a few feet from the next pirates, and the close proximity means you'll quickly learn how to ignore the sounds of snoring, the occasional grunt of discomfort, and the rather unpleasant smells that permeate everything. The wood beneath your feet is constantly wet, slick with the humidity and the salt water that seeps in through the cracks. But the worst part, the smell. It's like a heavy, wet blanket that wraps itself around you, and no matter how much you try to ignore it, it's always there. You get used to the scent of rot, stale bread, spoiled meat, and the all-encompassing odor of human sweat. The air is damp too often, so moist that you can feel it pressing down on your skin, as if the humidity has taken on a life of its own. There's barely any ventilation, and with so many people crammed together, the air quickly becomes thick and stifling. And then there's the constant motion. The ship's swaying is something you never really adjust to, no matter how long you've been on the water. It's not a smooth, relaxing motion, more of a constant, subtle lurching that keeps your stomach on edge. Some of the crew members get used to it, their bodies learning to sway with the motion. But for most of the pirates, it's just one more thing to endure. It makes eating difficult and sleeping even harder. The sound of waves crashing against the hull is a constant reminder that, out here, the sea doesn't care if you're comfortable. But comfort isn't exactly a priority on a pirate ship. What matters is survival, and in this environment, that's a daily struggle. Hygiene is a distant afterthought. The water supply is limited, and there's no real way to wash away the grime and sweat of the day. Most pirates wear the same clothes for weeks at a time, if not longer. Their bodies are often covered in dirt salt, and the occasional scab from an accident or fight. Showers. Those are a luxury that simply doesn't exist in this world. You make do with what you have, and that usually means wiping your face with a rag that is just as dirty as the rest of you. Now, it's not as if the crew is entirely without comforts. There are small joys to be found, even in the darkest of times. For example, some pirates keep small trinkets or pieces of jewelry with them, things they've plundered from previous raids. A glint of gold might catch your eye in the dim light, and for a moment you might feel a flicker of hope, a reminder of why you're enduring this harsh life, the promise of treasure. But that's often where the fantasy ends. In reality, the treasure is a rare thing, and when it does appear, it's usually just a few coins that won't do much to ease the pain of your aching bones. So, why stay here? Why endure the unspeakable filth, the lack of privacy, and the constant feeling of being trapped? Well, the answer is complicated. For some, it's the lure of adventure. They joined the crew hoping for glory and riches, though the likelihood of finding either is slim. For others, it's the promise of freedom. On a pirate ship, the rules of society don't apply in the same way. You're far from the reach of the law, free to live outside the constraints of civilization. But that freedom comes at a steep price, one that's paid in sweat discomfort, and the constant knowledge that at any moment, everything could fall apart. You've probably heard that pirates lived a life of complete lawlessness, doing whatever they pleased. But that's not entirely true. While it's true that pirates were often considered outlaws, there were codes and rules that governed life aboard their ships. These codes were important, essential, even to keeping order among a group of men who lived in constant danger and discomfort. But don't think these codes made life any easier. In fact, they often made things more complicated. For example, while there were rules about how to divide up the spoils of a successful raid, there were also rules about how to punish those who broke the code. Stealing from the crew was a serious crime, and the punishment for it was severe. Pirates were known to punish thieves by marooning them on a deserted island, leaving them to die alone, or even worse, by hanging them from the yardarm in full view of the rest of the crew. Those kinds of punishments were meant to deter others from breaking the rules, but they also made life aboard the ship a constant game of balancing survival with maintaining order. As you sit there in the dark, swaying with the motion of the ship, you can almost feel the weight of these rules pressing down on you. You know that if you step out of line, if you break the code, there could be serious consequences. But at the same time, you're reminded that the pirate code is one of the few things that provides a sense of structure in this chaotic world. So as you listen to the sound of the waves crashing against the hull and feel the humidity press down on you, remember that life below deck on a pirate ship isn't just about the discomfort. It's about survival, about making it through another day. And in this world, the ability to endure is what will keep you alive. As you shift your focus from the cramped quarters below deck to the upper deck, you realize the difference between your life and the captain's life could not be starker. The pirate captain's role might sound glamorous, with their position at the top of the ship's hierarchy, surrounded by the crew's respect and perhaps fear. But truth be told, being a captain was anything but easy. Sure, the captain had the final say on all matters of life aboard the ship, but they also had the most to lose, and the responsibility that came with that power was a burden that often weighed heavily. First, let's take a look at how the captain was chosen. Contrary to popular belief, pirate ships weren't governed by random chaos or pure violence. While pirates could be ruthless, they weren't mindless savages. The captain was typically elected by the crew based on merit, charisma, and crucially navigational skill. A pirate crew wouldn't follow someone who couldn't lead them to their next target, or, worse yet, couldn't navigate through dangerous waters. A captain was expected to have a sharp mind, the ability to read the sea, and the experience to handle difficult situations. But while these qualities might seem impressive, they didn't guarantee long-term success. The life of a captain wasn't nearly as cushy as it's often made out to be. When things went wrong, whether it was a failed raid, a shipwreck, or a battle that ended in defeat, the captain was the first to be blamed. Sure, they had a strong crew backing them, but at the end of the day, it was their neck on the line. And when things went really wrong, like if a mutiny broke out, they were usually the first to go. In fact, there are stories of pirate captains being abandoned on deserted islands, their fates sealed by their own crew after a failed mission or battle. But even while the captain held the most power, there were still some limits to it. In fact, pirates had their own form of democracy of sorts. Most pirate ships had a quartermaster, a key officer, who was in charge of maintaining discipline, dividing spoils, and keeping order. The quartermaster was often more important than the captain in terms of day-to-day operations. If a captain lost the support of the crew, the quartermaster was the one who could step in and restore balance or incite a mutiny. Despite the captain's supreme authority in matters of leadership and decisions on raids or navigation, the crew had a say in how things were done. Decisions like going after a particular ship or raiding a specific port weren't made in isolation. Pirate ships often followed a strict set of rules called the Articles of Agreement, also known as pirate codes, and these were agreed upon by the crew before setting sail. The crew would vote on certain actions, and the captain's decisions weren't immune to scrutiny. Pirates were notoriously democratic when it came to sharing their loot. Typically, the spoils of a raid were divided in a way that rewarded those who had risked the most. But that didn't mean the captain was left empty-handed. They were just entitled to a slightly larger share of the treasure, usually 1.5 to 2 times the amount of an ordinary crew member. But this still wasn't much in the grand scheme of things, especially after the crew took their share. It's worth noting that this equal sharing of plunder was part of what made pirate ships unique, compared to other naval vessels where officers might receive a disproportionate share of the spoils. Being a pirate captain was a risky business, even though they could maintain authority through fear-respect or the threat of mutiny. Many captains found themselves in a precarious position. One misstep could lead to their downfall. A pirate ship, after all, wasn't just a floating fortress of treasure. It was also a hotbed of tension, anger, and shifting allegiances. The crew could turn on you at any moment. The captain had to be savvy, charismatic, and always watch their back. You might be wondering what it was like to interact with the captain on a personal level. To some degree, the captain was more approachable than you'd think. On a pirate ship, everyone knew their role, and the captain had to maintain the loyalty of the crew. However, there was no mistaking who was in charge. You could imagine the captain striding across the deck with authority, but not without the occasional soft word to their crew. These leaders were not tyrants they couldn't afford to be. Pirates were a rough lot, and they respected those who treated them with fairness, and occasionally showed a bit of camaraderie. Still, it was understood that the captain's orders were to be obeyed or else. Then there's the pirate captain's actual day-to-day life, which is often glossed over in the myths of treasure hunting and bold adventures. When you're a captain, you're responsible for the ship itself. That means ensuring the ship stays in working order, that the crew is trained and ready for combat, and that everything from navigation to provisioning is handled. The captain spent their time overseeing all this, but they also had to keep morale high. It was a delicate balance, to be sure. With everyone's fate tied to your decisions, the pressure must have been unbearable at times. So, how long would a pirate captain stay in charge before being overthrown or betrayed? Surprisingly, many captains held their positions for extended periods, though often their reigns were marked with tension and uneasy alliances. Historians still argue whether a pirate captain's rule was as tenuous as it appears, or if there were certain tricks of the trade they used to keep control over their crews. The most successful captains were often those who earned their crew's respect not just through strength, but through intelligence and diplomacy. A few were known to be particularly skilled at keeping rival factions within their crew from spiraling into mutiny. The balance of power on a pirate ship was always in flux, and the captain had to navigate that ever-shifting dynamic, carefully ensuring that their own leadership didn't become their downfall. In the end, while the pirate captain had the title of leader, they were in many ways just as much a prisoner of the ship and the crew as anyone else. They were bound to the same hardships, dangers, and discomforts as the rest of the pirates, and while they may have enjoyed the spoils of their position, it often came with a heavy cost both in terms of responsibility and the constant fear of being overthrown. So, as you imagine standing on the deck of the pirate ship, eyes on the horizon, you realize that the captain's life was far from luxurious. It was a life of constant vigilance leadership and the looming threat of betrayal. Now that we've met the captain, let's take a moment to delve into the darker side of pirate life. Discipline rules and the rather unpleasant punishments that came with breaking them. Life on a pirate ship wasn't all treasure hunts and high seas adventure. In fact, pirate crews were often governed by strict codes of conduct, and they made sure those who broke the rules felt the consequences. The threat of punishment was an ever-present force hanging over the crew like a storm cloud, and no matter how tough or hardened a pirate thought they were, there was always the possibility of facing the captain's or quartermaster's wrath. In the chaotic world of piracy, discipline was critical for maintaining some semblance of order. The ship had to function as a well-oiled machine in order to survive the rough seas and battle-ready enemies. Pirates were often young men desperate and wild, with little regard for authority outside the ship. It was the ship's codes and punishments that kept things from descending into complete chaos. One of the most infamous punishments aboard pirate ships was the flogging often referred to as a cat-o'-nine-tails whipping. This was a brutal form of discipline that involved a whip with multiple tails each weighted with knots or bits of metal. The process was excruciating, with each lash delivering a sting that could tear through flesh. It was meant to humiliate, and in the worst cases, incapacitate. If you were caught stealing from the ship or the crew, or if you neglected your duties in a particularly dangerous way, you could find yourself at the mercy of the cat-o'-nine-tails. But flogging wasn't the only punishment pirates feared. There were other, perhaps more insidious methods of correction. Take the infamous walking the plank, for example. While it's often romanticized in movies, walking the plank was a punishment meant to carry out an execution, a swift end, for a pirate who had proven to be too much of a threat. The unfortunate pirate would be forced to walk along a narrow plank, usually at the edge of the ship, before being shoved off into the dark, turbulent water below. There was no return from this fate. The victim was left to drown or be consumed by sea creatures. But here's the kicker. Historically, walking the plank was actually quite rare. Pirates preferred to maroon their enemies on deserted islands, leaving them to die of thirst, hunger, or by the hands of predators. Still, the idea of being cast into the ocean to die alone with nothing but your thoughts, well, that was enough to keep most pirates on their toes. In addition to physical punishments, there were also financial penalties. Pirates didn't exactly pay for food, lodging, or much else while on board, but the consequences for misbehavior could still hit them where it hurt right in the pocket. A pirate who stole from the crew or shirked their duties might find their share of treasure reduced or even confiscated. But this wasn't always a punishment for misdeeds. Sometimes it was simply a way of keeping the crew in line. The threat of losing your share of the loot was a powerful motivator, and many pirates would rather endure a flogging than risk being cut off from the riches they so desperately craved. Even in the midst of such harsh punishments, there was still a code of fairness, or at least the perception of fairness. Pirates often held a kind of twisted sense of justice. They would conduct trials for those accused of crimes like theft or mutiny, and the crew would decide the punishment. Sometimes the accused would even have the chance to plead their case. While it wasn't a court of law by any stretch of the imagination, it was a reminder that life on a pirate ship was governed by rules that couldn't be broken without serious consequences. But let's not get too lost in the brutality of it all. The pirate ship also had a form of communal order that wasn't just about punishing the bad guys. In fact, pirates often prided themselves on their sense of equality, especially when it came to dividing loot. This wasn't to say they were all peaceful comrades, far from it. But there was something almost democratic about the way they operated. When it came to the division of treasure, the loot was often split in a fairly predictable manner. Captains and officers were entitled to a larger portion, of course, but the rest of the crew was still guaranteed a share. And for the most part, if a pirate had earned their keep, they'd receive a fair cut. For example, the Articles of Agreement, the pirate code we touched on earlier, dictated that pirates should share the spoils of a successful raid equally, with a few exceptions. A captain might get a larger share, and a quartermaster might receive slightly more for overseeing the ship's operations. But most pirates could expect an equal division of any plundered goods, which was a much more equitable system than, say, the structured hierarchy of a navy or merchant ship. Some pirates even went so far as to establish additional rules regarding compensation for injuries. So if a pirate lost an arm or leg during a battle, they were promised a financial cushion for their misfortune. But let's face it, the fact that you might be out a limb didn't really guarantee a happier life. It just meant you'd have to endure even more hardship. With all this said, there were certain aspects of pirate life that might have made things slightly easier. Pirates often had a greater sense of freedom than sailors in the service of the crown or a merchant ship. If you disagreed with the captain, you had the ability to vote with the crew and oust them. The pirate ship wasn't as structured as a navy, and there was far more room for individual input and rebellion. Pirate crews could hold elections, which allowed for some semblance of democratic rule. But despite this freedom, a pirate's life was hardly carefree. As we've mentioned, punishments for disobedience were severe, and even the thought of losing your share of the treasure could make even the bravest pirate buckle. And so, while the pirate ship might have been a world of adventure and rebellion, it was also a world of harsh discipline. No matter how much a pirate longed for freedom, they knew deep down that any misstep could mean a brutal punishment. Or worse, if you were lucky, you'd get away with just a flogging. If not, you might find yourself walking the plank, or worse yet, marooned on an island abandoned to the elements and the creatures lurking in the shadows. Now, let's move away from the grim realities of discipline and punishment and look at the more dangerous and often unseen challenges that came with being a pirate. Health hazards. Sailing the open seas was a perilous task, not just because of naval battles or the threat of mutiny, but because of the conditions that could literally wear you down until you were little more than a ghost of the person who stepped aboard. Pirate life wasn't glamorous, in the way it's often portrayed in the movies, where the sun shines and everyone's healthy and spry. No life on the high seas was a constant battle to stay alive, not just from enemies, but from disease, malnutrition, and the gnawing grip of illness. The first and perhaps most infamous health hazard a pirate would face was scurvy. If you've ever heard of scurvy, you probably know it's caused by a lack of vitamin C. But what you might not realize is just how devastating it was for sailors' pirates included during the 17th century. Pirates spent weeks, even months, at sea with very little fresh produce or vitamin-rich food. They lived on salted meats, hardtack, a dry, rock-hard biscuit, and occasionally fish. These foods, while providing the necessary calories to keep the crew going, were severely lacking in vitamins, particularly vitamin C. As a result, Scurvy was incredibly common and could ravage an entire crew before anyone even knew what was going on. The symptoms of scurvy were awful. You'd start feeling weak, your gums would swell and bleed, and your joints would ache as if every part of your body was in revolt. The worst part, though, was that it often made your body go numb and your teeth loosen, causing painful abscesses. The more advanced cases were even worse. Pirates could experience a fever-extreme fatigue and eventually die from the disease. The lack of fresh fruits and vegetables meant that pirates had to find creative and often futile ways to stave off scurvy, such as eating dried, salted foods or chewing on whatever they could find, hoping to squeeze out some nutritional value from a few scraps. And yet, even though scurvy was widely recognized, it wasn't until much later in history that sailors truly understood what caused it. Some pirates had their own theories. Maybe it was the salt air, or perhaps the humidity. But it wasn't until the 18th century that the connection between scurvy and vitamin C was truly understood. Until then, pirates were left to endure this horrific disease with no real way to prevent it, other than hoping a lucky visit to a tropical island could give them a boost of fresh fruit. But scurvy wasn't the only ailment that plagued pirates. Dysentery was another major issue. While pirates may have been feared for their strength in battle, their digestive systems were often much weaker. Dysentery, which is an inflammation of the intestines, was a common affliction for sailors in the 17th century, caused by contaminated water or food. The symptoms of dysentery were severe vomiting, diarrhea, and dehydration. In the close quarters of a pirate ship, there was no escaping it. Unsanitary conditions, poor hygiene, and limited access to fresh water made dysentery a near inevitable part of life aboard a pirate ship. The worst part was the lack of effective treatments, meaning that those who contracted dysentery could quickly weaken and die. But perhaps even more terrifying than scurvy or dysentery were the mysterious fevers that could strike down a pirate without warning. Many pirates didn't have the luxury of modern medicine, and they were often at the mercy of whatever diseases happened to be spreading in the region they were sailing through. Malaria, yellow fever, and even typhus were common in the tropical areas where pirates frequently sailed. These fevers could be fatal, and there was little to no understanding of how to combat them. If a pirate developed a fever while out at sea, they could be left to sweat through the night, feverish and delirious, while the rest of the crew continued to work, hoping they would either get better or be lucky enough to survive. Then there were the injuries. Pirates lived a dangerous life, constantly at risk of injury from battles, falls, and accidents on deck. Think about it. You're running around a ship often with wet, slippery surfaces, hauling ropes, climbing masts, and wielding sharp weapons like swords or cutlasses. It doesn't take much for things to go wrong, and even a minor injury could lead to terrible consequences. If you weren't immediately treated, an infection set in gangrene could spread, eventually leading to amputation or death. Without antibiotics or proper medical care, pirates often faced the brutal reality of losing limbs in battle or after accidents on board. In fact, pirate ships had rudimentary medical supplies at best. Pirates would rely on crude treatments, like applying poultices of herbs or using makeshift bandages. There was no such thing as painkillers or antiseptics. What pirates had were the barest essentials for surviving injury or illness, and even then those options were limited. A pirate who was injured or ill would often be left to recover or die at the mercy of time, luck, and the ability of their fellow crew members to treat their wounds. In some ways, this lack of medical care is one of the biggest misconceptions about pirate life, that these men were indestructible constantly, in the peak of health, and able to endure anything. The truth is far different. Pirates were just as vulnerable to the dangers of disease, injury, and illness as anyone else, if not more so, given the conditions they lived under. And let's not forget about the risk of infection. Without the modern sanitization methods we take for granted today, infection was an ever-present threat. The damp, filthy conditions of the ship created the perfect breeding ground for bacteria and viruses. Even a tiny scrape could become infected and lead to something far worse, as pirate ships rarely had skilled doctors or surgeons aboard. Any pirate who became seriously ill was in grave danger. So, while you might picture pirates as hardy, swashbuckling adventurers, the truth is far more sobering. These men were constantly battling not just the dangers of the sea and the enemy, but their own health. Illnesses like scurvy, dysentery, fevers, and infections were often as deadly as any cannonball or sword strike. Pirates didn't have the luxury of modern medicine, and for many their journey ended not with a flash of steel, but with the slow, agonizing march of disease. Now that we've taken a deeper look at the health hazards pirates faced, let's shift gears and examine what life was like for the average pirate crew member. If you're imagining a life filled with adventure free from the confines of society, you might be somewhat disappointed. Sure, there were moments of excitement raiding, sailing, and the occasional glimpse of treasure, but the everyday reality of being a pirate was far more grueling and far less glamorous than the legends make it out to be. In fact, life aboard a pirate ship was hard work, filled with long hours, physical labor, and little room for rest. First of all, let's talk about the work itself. Pirates weren't lounging around on deck sipping rum and twiddling their thumbs, as some popular depictions might have you believe. No, every member of the crew had a role to play in keeping the ship afloat literally. A pirate ship was a working vessel, and everyone from the youngest swabby to the grizzled veterans had to pull their weight. There were ropes to haul, sails to trim, and countless other tasks that needed to be done to ensure the ship was ready for whatever lay ahead. Pirates were essentially sailors who happened to operate outside the law, and the work was grueling, regardless of the pirate's rank. For most pirates, their days began early. The crew was expected to rise with the sun ready to get to work. Morning routines included cleaning the ship, repairing any damage to the hull or sails, and ensuring that all equipment was in working order. The weather and sea conditions could change at a moment's notice, and pirates had to stay vigilant. A pirate ship wasn't a place for rest and relaxation. It was a place where hard labor never stopped. Even on days without a battle, there was always something to do, whether it was scrubbing the deck or making sure the ship was properly stocked with provisions. But what about when the pirates weren't in the middle of a raid or navigating stormy waters? What did they do for entertainment or to pass the time? The answer, unfortunately, is that there wasn't much to do. There were no movies, no internet, and no social media to keep pirates entertained. Instead, pirates would pass the time with simple activities, playing dice, or cards perhaps, or telling stories around the fire. There was often singing with pirates, passing down sea shanties and other songs to help boost morale during long, monotonous stretches of sailing. And then there was gambling. Pirates loved to gamble, whether it was betting on dice rolls, card games, or even the occasional foot race. Pirates also spent a lot of their time planning raids. When the crew wasn't working on the ship itself, they were usually preparing for their next heist. Every pirate had one goal: treasure. But finding treasure wasn't as easy as it sounds. Pirates didn't just stumble across hidden chests of gold. They had to work hard to locate potential targets, spy on merchant ships, and prepare for the dangers of combat. Pirates often sailed in groups, strategizing and mapping out their attacks meticulously. Raiding was a team effort, and everyone needed to be on the same page in order to succeed. Pirate ships rarely sailed alone. They often traveled in small fleets, making it easier to overpower their targets. But even with all the work and planning, pirates were still faced with the possibility of failure. Raids didn't always go as planned. Sometimes the merchant ship they attacked was too well armed, or the pirates' timing was off. It was a dangerous gamble every time they set sail, and even if the raid was successful, the spoils were often meager. Pirates had to split the loot among the entire crew, meaning that everyone received a smaller portion than they might have hoped for. there was always a chance that the treasure wasn't worth the risk, especially when factoring in the cost of repairs to the ship or the possibility of injury or death during the raid. This brings us to the idea of what exactly pirates were fighting for and what they actually got from a successful raid. Contrary to the popular notion that pirates always walked away with vast amounts of treasure, the truth is much more nuanced. Pirates often targeted merchant ships or towns for their supplies, food, and weapons, rather than piles of gold or silver. These supplies were essential to keeping the crew alive, and they often came with the added bonus of trading for goods in foreign ports. As for treasure, it was rare. Sure, there were legendary pirate hauls, but for most pirates, the riches were few and far between. The majority of the time, pirates were raiding just to survive, gathering whatever they could to keep their ship afloat and their bellies full. So, what was the pirate crew like on a day-to-day basis? It wasn't all plunder and adventure. For many pirates, it was a daily grind of maintaining the ship, keeping an eye on the horizon for their next target, and trying to stay healthy in an environment that was both physically demanding and inherently dangerous. Pirates weren't just freeloaders living off the spoils of their raids, they were workers too, albeit in a very different sense than the sailors of a traditional navy. They had to be constantly alert, constantly prepared for the next battle, and constantly working to keep their ship in shape. On top of that, there were the interpersonal dynamics to contend with. Life aboard a pirate ship was often tense. While the crew might be united in their desire for treasure, they were still individuals with their own goals, egos, and personalities. Tensions could flare at any time, especially when dividing loot or making important decisions about where to sail next. Disputes over treasure leadership or decisions about when to raid could turn into full-blown arguments or even fights. And because pirates operated outside of traditional legal structures, there was no real way to settle disputes other than to turn to the captain or quartermaster, who would usually make the final call. If that didn't work, a mutiny was always a possibility. Despite all of this, there was a sense of camaraderie among pirates. After all, they were all in the same boat literally. They faced the same dangers, endured the same hardships, and worked together to survive. Pirate crews were often close-knit, forming bonds of loyalty and friendship in the face of shared adversity. They were a team, and even though the work was grueling and the conditions harsh, the sense of solidarity was one of the few things that made it all bearable. As we move forward in our exploration of life aboard a pirate ship, we now find ourselves venturing into one of the most iconic aspects of pirate lore treasure hunting. You've probably heard countless stories of pirates searching for buried treasure maps marked with X, and the idea that each pirate ship was a floating gold mine full of riches beyond imagination. The very notion of pirates is built on the idea of hoarding vast wealth and searching for hidden treasures. But how true is that narrative? Was treasure really the driving force behind every pirate's journey? Let's take a look at what pirates actually plundered and how much treasure they truly acquired. First of all, it's important to clarify what pirates were actually after. Most of the time, it wasn't piles of gold and sparkling jewels. Sure, those things existed, but they were rare. Pirates weren't likely to sail the seas and stumble upon a hidden chest of gold coins buried on a forgotten island. That's the stuff of legend, not reality. The truth is, pirate ships typically targeted merchant vessels, ships that carried goods like spices, sugar, tobacco, and other valuable commodities. These goods were what pirates were after, not the flashy riches you might expect. When pirates attacked merchant ships, they would often seize the cargo, which could then be sold at various ports to turn a profit. This was the real treasure for pirates, the ability to trade or sell the plundered goods for food supplies or cold, hard cash. That's not to say that gold and silver weren't part of the equation. Occasionally, pirates would come across a ship carrying a chest of treasure, perhaps from a wealthy merchant or a colonial settlement. And when pirates did manage to capture such a prize, it was undoubtedly exciting. But even in those rare moments, the loot wasn't always as plentiful as it might seem. A pirate crew had to split any treasure they took, meaning that what seemed like a vast fortune would often end up being a modest sum once it was divided among the crew. The pirate code, which governed the division of spoils, ensured that every pirate got a fair share no matter their rank or role, though the captain and officers usually received a slightly larger portion. Now, let's take a moment to dive into what might seem like a curious aspect of pirate treasure hunting, the infamous treasure maps. We've all heard of the classic pirate map, often drawn on aged parchment, with cryptic symbols marking the location of buried treasure. This trope has become a staple of pirate mythology thanks in large part to works like Treasure Island by Robert Louis Stevenson. But here's the kicker. Pirates didn't really use treasure maps in the way we think they did. While there are certainly stories of pirates burying treasure on remote islands, the practice was relatively rare. Most pirates didn't go to the trouble of hiding their plunder on some faraway island. In fact, they were far more likely to sell their loot or stash it somewhere closer to their base of operations. There are a few well-known stories of pirates burying treasure, most notably the legend of Captain Kidd's buried treasure. But these tales are often far more myth than reality. If pirates weren't burying treasure on remote islands, then what was their real relationship with the idea of treasure? Well, pirates were driven by a desire for wealth, but not in the form of the classic buried chest fantasy. They wanted riches that could be traded, that would help them survive, that could keep their crew fed and their ship in working order. Treasure wasn't just about gold coins, it was about securing the necessities of life. Pirates raided ships for cargo spices, rum, cloth, food, and tools, things that were vital for their survival at sea. Pirates needed to stay healthy, and they needed to keep their ship stocked with provisions for long voyages. If they were lucky enough to plunder some treasure along the way, all the better, but it was far from their primary goal. And even if pirates did manage to acquire wealth, that wealth was often fleeting. Pirate crews were notoriously undisciplined, and the money they earned from a successful raid didn't always last long. Pirates lived fast, spending their earnings on gambling, alcohol, and women. While some pirates saved their earnings for future ventures or investments, many spent it all almost immediately. There's a certain irony in the fact that pirates often associated with greed and the pursuit of wealth were also some of the most wasteful when it came to handling their spoils. The pursuit of treasure in many ways was a fleeting and unsustainable goal. Pirates lived for the present, not for the future. Another key factor in the pirate obsession with treasure is the way it plays into the mythology of piracy. Pirates in the 17th and 18th centuries were often romanticized as freedom-loving rebels who defied authority, living by their own rules. This myth has only grown over the years thanks in large part to literature, film, and popular media. The idea of pirates seeking treasure became a symbol of rebellion and adventure. It's no surprise that the treasure-hunting pirate has become a lasting icon, even though the reality of piracy was far less glamorous. Interestingly, pirates didn't just rely on treasure from merchant ships. They would often target entire towns or settlements, attacking and looting as they went. They would take everything from food and clothing to tools and weapons. This type of raid, known as a land attack, was just as common as attacking ships on the water. Pirates often targeted coastal settlements, where they could easily escape by sea after the raid. These raids were usually quick, violent affairs, and pirates would leave with anything they could carry, treasure or not. The key was to get in, get the loot, and get out before anyone could mount a defense. So, while the pursuit of treasure was certainly a driving force behind pirate life, it wasn't quite as glamorous as the stories would have you believe. For most pirates, treasure wasn't about buried chests of gold. It was about the survival of the crew, the ability to trade and acquire essential goods, and when they were lucky, a little extra wealth to enjoy for a fleeting moment. The real treasure was never just gold. It was the ability to keep going, to keep surviving, and to keep living the pirate life, whatever that might mean on any given day. Pirates were not so much treasure hunters as they were opportunists, always looking for the next chance to grab what they could before the world caught up with them. As you think about the pirates in their pursuit of treasure, remember that the vast majority of their time was spent in the grind of survival. Even if treasure was within their grasp, it was just one part of a much larger picture, filled with hard work, constant danger, and a sense of urgency that kept them pushing forward, always on the lookout for their next plunder. Now that we've explored the treasure and the hard work involved in the pirate life, let's venture into one of the more dangerous aspects of piracy naval combat. You've probably imagined yourself aboard a pirate ship, charging across the waves with cannons blazing, taking down merchant ships or battling rival pirates for supremacy. The truth, however, is that combat at sea was often a chaotic, terrifying, and brutally intense experience that left little room for glory. If you were a pirate, and you found yourself in the thick of a naval battle, you might be about to face one of the most horrifying and life-threatening experiences of your entire piratical career. First, let's talk about what a typical naval battle looked like in the 17th century. Pirate ships were typically smaller than the heavily armed warships of the navies they often faced. This made the pirate ship nimble, able to maneuver quickly, and with agility perfect for ambushes. Pirate tactics relied on speed and surprise, getting close to the enemy ship, boarding it, and fighting hand-to-hand with cutlasses, pistols, and daggers. This was a dangerous game. If you boarded the wrong ship or underestimated the enemy, the result could be disastrous. When a pirate ship first spotted a potential target, the excitement was palpable. The crew would prepare to go into battle. The ship would speed up, closing the distance between them and the enemy ship, and the crew would ready their weapons. At this stage, the pirate ship would usually try to get close enough to launch a surprise attack. The pirates would then board the enemy ship with ropes or ladders, attacking with their weapons as they scrambled across the deck. But before boarding even began, there was the terrifying sound of cannon fire. The cannons on pirate ships were usually small, but they were still formidable weapons, designed to cause maximum damage. The sound of cannons firing across the water would echo over the waves, and the air would be thick with smoke and the acrid scent of gunpowder. The first few cannonballs that struck could leave huge holes in the enemy ship's hull, causing the ship to take on water and begin to sink. The violent explosions of cannon fire, combined with the smoke, made it nearly impossible to see clearly. The chaos of the battle would be compounded by the screams of injured men, the crackling of gunfire, and the endless din of the fight. The pirates had to board quickly and efficiently. If the battle dragged on for too long, the Navy could reinforce the ship, or worse, a larger group of enemy ships could arrive. Time was critical, and pirates couldn't afford to hesitate. If they were boarding a larger enemy ship, the pirate crew would need to fight hand-to-hand with a larger, better-armed crew. Even though pirates were usually well-trained in close-quarters combat, this wasn't a situation where they could always come out on top. Their victory depended on their ability to overwhelm the enemy, quickly taking them by surprise, and overwhelming them before reinforcements could arrive. But here's where the reality of pirate life really set in naval combat wasn't just about guns and knives. The sheer danger of battle at sea came from the massive forces at play. The pirate ships weren't built to withstand prolonged combat. They were swift, light, and maneuverable, but not particularly durable. The larger warships the pirates often encountered could rain down cannonballs from a distance, tearing into the pirate ship and potentially sinking it. One hit from a well-placed cannonball could tear a hole in the hull, flooding the ship, and forcing the crew to abandon it. But pirates weren't just battling with their weapons. The sea itself was a constant, unpredictable enemy. Sudden squalls could whip up, churning the waters and making it difficult for ships to navigate, let alone fight. Pirate ships had to stay fast and nimble to avoid getting trapped in rough seas. And even if the pirates were victorious in battle, the real challenge was getting away. As the battle wound down, the pirates would scramble to board their spoils, and then they had to sail away as quickly as possible, often pursued by other ships looking for revenge. That's when things got especially dangerous, trying to outrun the enemy ship, maneuvering through dangerous waters, and dealing with the injuries that many of the pirates had sustained. While piracy may have seemed like a profession full of bold adventurers, the reality of naval combat was far more terrifying. Even the bravest pirate knew that any battle could be their last. Every encounter was a gamble, where a single misstep could lead to death. The naval warfare that pirates engaged in wasn't about honor or glory. It was about survival. You might board an enemy ship, but the price of that success could be steep injuries, death, or worse, being captured and thrown into a dungeon awaiting trial or execution. One of the more terrifying realities of naval combat was the sheer brutality of it all. Pirates weren't just fighting to disable a ship. They were fighting to kill, to destroy, and to get away with whatever they could plunder. The pirate code had its own rules for battle, and pirates didn't hesitate to engage in some of the most violent, shocking tactics when necessary. Some pirates would fire upon an enemy ship from a distance, while others would board and engage in bloody hand-to-hand combat. The chaos of a battle at sea meant that everything, whether it was a sudden blast of gunpowder or a sword fight, could shift the course of the battle in an instant. In naval combat, pirates had to be clever, aggressive, and ready to take risks. They couldn't afford to be passive or cautious. As dangerous as the pirates were, they were also often under-equipped compared to their opponents. They didn't have the luxury of heavy armor or large fleets. What they had was speed, surprise, and a willingness to fight dirty. And that made them a formidable enemy for anyone who crossed their path. Once the battle was over, though, the work didn't stop. Pirates had to secure the ship they had captured, repair any damage, and then figure out how to get their spoils back to a safe haven. It wasn't just about victory. It was about survival, and making sure that whatever treasure or goods they had obtained wouldn't be lost to the sea or to the next enemy encounter. Pirates had to stay on the move, constantly alert for danger, ready to fight again at a moment's notice. So, while the notion of pirate combat might be thrilling in the movies, the reality was much more complex. It was a high-stakes, nerve-wracking affair where the chances of survival were never guaranteed. Every battle was a gamble, and it wasn't the pirates' skill with their weapons that determined victory. It was their ability to outsmart and outlast their enemies in a brutal, unforgiving environment. Whether it was through superior strategy, sheer determination, or plain luck, pirate life at sea was always a delicate balance between life and death. As we continue our journey into the world of pirates, we now shift focus to something that often garners attention in popular culture: the superstitions and myths that dominated the lives of pirates. It's easy to picture pirates as bloodthirsty, lawless rebels. But what if I told you that many of them were deeply superstitious, driven by beliefs that were as much a part of their daily lives as their weapons or treasure hunts? For all their toughness and fearsome reputations, pirates were often governed by an array of superstitions and rituals that dictated their behavior, beliefs, and actions. Whether it was the belief in ghosts or the power of lucky charms, the world of pirates was far more spiritual than most people might think. One of the most famous superstitions that pirates adhered to was the belief in the ghost ship. These ghostly vessels were thought to sail the seas, often doomed to wander forever, their sails billowing, but their crew long gone. The legend of the ghost ship was pervasive, with many pirates believing they might one day encounter one. The most famous ghost ship is, of course, the Flying Dutchman, a spectral vessel that could never dock or find its way home. According to some pirate beliefs, seeing the Flying Dutchman was an omen of impending doom. If a pirate crew spotted this ill-fated ship, they would be sure that their own demise was imminent. The idea of a ship cursed to sail the seas for eternity was a chilling thought, and many pirates would go to great lengths to avoid encountering such a ship. Another widely held superstition among pirates was the belief in good luck charms often carried by sailors to protect them during dangerous voyages. These charms were highly personal. Some pirates carried specific objects that they believed would bring them good fortune. For example, some pirates would carry pieces of a shipwrecked vessel or personal trinkets from past raids. These items were thought to hold the power of the ship or the person they were taken from, providing the pirate with supernatural protection. Even a simple coin could serve as a good luck charm if it had the right history behind it. A pirate might have a lucky coin that was passed down through generations, believing that it had the power to keep them safe during a raid or battle. Beyond personal good luck, pirates also adhered to superstitions surrounding the sea itself. The ocean was seen as both a provider and a destroyer, and many pirates were deeply cautious about angering the sea. For instance, it was considered bad luck to kill an albatross or any seabird, as these creatures were believed to be messengers of the sea gods. Killing one was thought to bring terrible misfortune, and many pirates would go to great lengths to avoid such an act. Some even believed that the seabirds carried the souls of lost sailors, and harming them was seen as an unforgivable transgression. There were also superstitions tied to specific days of the week. For example, many pirates believed that sailing on a Friday was unlucky, and some avoided setting out to sea on that day. This belief may have been tied to Christianity, with Friday being the day of Christ's crucifixion. As a result, pirates would often delay their departure until Saturday in order to avoid the bad luck associated with a Friday voyage. The idea of avoiding bad luck was more than just a casual superstition. It was a matter of life and death and death, given the unpredictable and often violent nature of life at sea. Beyond personal charms and the belief in ghost ships, there was also a wealth of superstitions surrounding the act of piracy itself. Pirates would perform certain rituals before setting sail on a new raid, believing that these actions would bring them success and ward off bad fortune. One such ritual involved the pirate captain taking a piece of a shipwreck and using it to bless the crew, ensuring that they would sail safely and return victorious. Other superstitions involved wearing specific clothing such as red or black scarves, which were thought to protect the wearer from the dangers of battle or the sea. Pirates were also known to be deeply wary of bad omens. If a pirate ship encountered a storm or a freak accident at sea, the crew would often interpret it as a sign that they had angered the sea gods or fallen out of favor with the universe. In such cases, the crew would perform rituals or offer sacrifices to appease the forces of nature. These actions weren't taken lightly. Pirates believed that the consequences of angering the sea or the gods could be catastrophic, leading to the loss of their ship, their treasure, or even their lives. These superstitions and beliefs weren't just confined to sailors. Many pirate captains, known for their hard-nosed leadership, would also hold on to their own superstitions, often using them as a way to control the morale of the crew. A captain might promise a successful raid if the crew followed certain rituals, creating a sense of unity and purpose among the pirates. In some cases, these beliefs even became a form of propaganda, with captains using them to create an air of invincibility around their ship or crew. Pirates, after all, thrived on psychological warfare. A captain who could make the crew believe they were invincible, protected by the gods and the sea, was often the one who commanded the most respect. Interestingly, some pirates even kept journals or logbooks in which they recorded their own experiences with superstitions and omens. These accounts reveal just how deeply entrenched these beliefs were in pirate culture. Pirates would often write about encounters with ghost ships, strange occurrences at sea, or unusual weather patterns, interpreting them as messages from beyond the grave or warnings from the gods. These journals, though mostly lost to history, give us an intriguing glimpse into the psyche of pirates and the ways in which superstition played a role in their daily lives. But even with all their superstitions, pirates were still ruthless, pragmatic men and women who understood the importance of survival. They might have believed in lucky charms and omens, but they also knew that the real key to staying alive was their ability to outfight, outsmart, and outlast their enemies. Superstitions, while important, were just one part of a much larger equation. Pirates understood that without strong leadership, discipline, and strategy, no amount of good fortune or lucky charms could save them from the dangers of the high seas. In the end, the world of pirates was one that was deeply shaped by myth and superstition. Their belief in ghost ships, good luck charms, and omens served to provide some sense of control in a world that was by its very nature unpredictable and terrifying. The high seas with its constant dangers and challenges offered little certainty. But for the pirates who sailed upon them, these superstitions were a way to make sense of the chaos, a way to feel that for a brief moment they might have some say in their fate. As we continue our exploration of the pirate world, it's time to address one of the darker realities of pirate life, the extremely short life expectancy. While popular culture often portrays pirates as immortal adventurers, the truth is that life aboard a pirate ship was incredibly dangerous, and many pirates didn't live long enough to see their dreams of treasure or adventure come to fruition. In fact, pirates had a notoriously high mortality rate, and their chances of surviving beyond a few years were slim. From the moment they joined a pirate crew, they were walking a precarious tightrope, where a single misstep could mean a deadly end. The harsh conditions aboard pirate ships played a huge role in the short lives of pirates. The cramped, filthy quarters below deck, coupled with the constant threat of disease, made it difficult to survive for any length of time. Pirates were constantly exposed to unsanitary conditions with limited access to fresh water or food. The lack of proper hygiene was a major contributor to the spread of diseases like dysentery, scurvy, and cholera. These diseases could sweep through a pirate crew, leaving the healthiest members weak and vulnerable. And once someone contracted a disease, it was often too late for them to recover. Pirates didn't have access to modern medicine, and treatments were primitive at best. The result was that even minor illnesses could become fatal. But disease wasn't the only threat to a pirate's survival. Combat was another deadly reality of pirate life. Pirate ships were often involved in violent naval battles, where pirates had to fight not only enemy crews, but also the elements. The weapons used in these battles, swords, pistols, and cannons, were designed to inflict serious damage, and pirates were frequently injured in combat. Even if a pirate survived a skirmish, they might suffer from permanent injuries that would make life aboard the ship even more difficult. In a world without antibiotics or modern surgery, injuries often led to infection, and infection led to death. A pirate who lost a limb in battle or was severely wounded might not have the strength to recover, leading to their untimely demise. In addition to combat and disease, there were other environmental factors that contributed to the short lives of pirates. Pirate ships were constantly at the mercy of the sea, and storms were a frequent and dangerous threat. A sudden storm could destroy a ship in a matter of hours, leaving the crew stranded or worse, drowning in the treacherous waters. The unpredictability of the ocean made life even more perilous, and many pirates met their end at the hands of nature itself. A ship caught in a powerful gale could be blown off course, and without the proper navigation tools or knowledge of the waters, the crew could find themselves stranded on an unfamiliar shore or lost at sea. The lack of modern technology meant that pirates had to rely on their instincts and their experience. But even the most seasoned pirate could fall victim to the ocean's wrath. The chances of survival for a pirate were also diminished by the constant threat of mutiny. Pirate ships were often governed by a code of conduct, but that didn't mean that all pirates followed the rules. In fact, pirate crews were notoriously volatile, and there were frequent disputes over leadership and decision-making. If a captain or quartermaster lost the support of the crew, a mutiny could break out, and the pirate leader could be killed or cast adrift. Mutiny was a constant threat, and many pirates lived in fear of being overthrown. A pirate who lost their crew's loyalty could quickly find themselves fighting for their life with no guarantee of survival. And even if a pirate managed to avoid mutiny, they were still vulnerable to the whims of their fellow crew members. Piracy was a world full of danger, and any pirate could become a target if they lost favor with their shipmates. Then, there was the ever-present danger of capture. Pirates were, after all, criminals, and if they were caught by the Navy or other authorities, they faced grim consequences. Most pirates were executed if they were captured, often by hanging. There was no mercy for pirates who were caught, and the punishment for piracy was harsh and swift. Even if a pirate wasn't immediately executed, they might be imprisoned in a filthy, overcrowded prison, where disease and death were constant companions. The threat of capture was a daily reality for pirates, and many of them lived with the knowledge that their time on the high seas might be cut short by a chance encounter with a Navy ship. The sheer danger of piracy meant that even the most successful pirates had short careers. Famous pirates like Blackbeard, Anne Bonny, and Calico Jack Rackham all met untimely deaths. Blackbeard, for example, was killed in a bloody battle with British forces in 1718, just a few years after he became notorious for his exploits. Anne Bonny and Calico Jack were captured in 1720 and sentenced to hang, though Anne's fate remains a bit of a mystery. Some say she escaped from prison, while others claim she was executed in secret. The reality is that for all the wealth and adventure, piracy was a dangerous profession that rarely allowed its practitioners to grow old. What's perhaps most shocking about the pirate life expectancy is how young many of these pirates were. A significant portion of pirate crews consisted of men in their late teens or early 20s, with some even younger. Life aboard a pirate ship was physically demanding, and the constant threat of injury or death meant that the crew had to be in top shape. Pirates were often recruited from poor communities, and many of them were young men looking for a way to escape poverty or hardship. The promise of riches and adventure was alluring, but the reality of piracy was brutal, and many young pirates didn't survive long enough to see their dreams come true. For pirates, life was a constant gamble, and the odds were always stacked against them. Every raid, every battle, every storm brought the possibility of death. Even the most successful pirates, those who amassed treasure and gained fame, often met their end at the hands of the Navy, a mutiny, or simply through the harsh conditions of life at sea. As a pirate, you were always on borrowed time, with death waiting just around the corner. Pirates may have lived fast and died young, but they also lived with a sense of freedom that was rare in the world of the 17th century. Despite the dangers, pirates embraced the pirate life because it offered a chance to break free from the constraints of society, even if it meant sacrificing their future. Ultimately, the life expectancy of a pirate was a testament to the dangers of piracy, both in terms of physical health and the constant threats that loomed over their daily existence. Pirates may have been infamous for their rebellious nature and their pursuit of treasure, but their lives were often short, violent, and filled with peril at every turn. Now that we've delved into the harsh realities of life expectancy for pirates, let's take a step back and examine the concept of pirate codes, rules, and the surprisingly democratic structure of many pirate ships. When most people think of pirates, they envision lawless, ruthless outlaws with no rules, no structure, and no sense of order. But in reality, pirate ships often had strict codes of conduct that governed almost every aspect of life on board. Far from being the chaotic, anarchic communities we often see portrayed in the media. Pirate crews had their own form of governance based on agreements that were sometimes voted on and written into a pirate code. The idea of democracy on a pirate ship may sound strange, but it was one of the most important aspects of pirate life. The pirate code was essentially a set of rules that the crew agreed upon before setting sail. These rules covered a range of issues from how loot should be divided to how disputes should be handled. The code ensured that there was a clear understanding of what was expected from each crew member, and it helped maintain a sense of order and fairness aboard the ship. It was not uncommon for the pirate crew to elect their officers, including the captain and the quartermaster, and even the decision-making process for major actions, like whether to attack another ship, was often put to a vote. One of the most critical parts of the pirate code was how the spoils of a successful raid were divided. When a pirate ship took a prize, the loot wasn't just thrown into one big pile to be divvied up however the captain pleased. Instead, the pirate code usually established clear guidelines on how the treasure would be distributed. For instance, the captain typically received a larger share than the average crew member, usually about 2 shares, compared to 1 share for a regular pirate. The quartermaster, who was responsible for maintaining order and discipline among the crew, might also receive a slightly larger share. The exact rules of division could vary from ship to ship, but the goal was always to ensure that everyone received something for their efforts. In addition to dividing loot, the code also outlined rules about conduct and behavior aboard the ship. For example, fighting or stealing among the crew was often strictly forbidden, and violators could face harsh punishment. In fact, some pirate codes even stipulated that any pirate who engaged in a fight over a minor dispute could be marooned or worse, killed. The reason for such strictness was simple. Pirate ships were communities that depended on cooperation and mutual respect. In a world where survival was often a matter of life and death, maintaining unity within the crew was paramount. If pirates couldn't trust each other, their chance of survival would decrease dramatically. The pirate code also addressed issues like gambling and drinking, which were popular pastimes among pirates, but could lead to serious problems if not managed properly. Some pirate codes had specific rules for how gambling could be conducted, with strict limits to ensure that no one lost everything in one game. Drinking, too, was regulated, as excessive alcohol consumption could lead to dangerous behavior and ultimately compromise the safety of the ship. Pirates understood that they needed to maintain a level of discipline and order, even in an environment that was far from conventional. Another interesting aspect of the pirate code was the way it protected the rights of injured pirates. Pirates were notoriously dangerous, and injuries were a common occurrence. However, many pirate codes had provisions for compensating crew members who were injured during raids. In some cases, pirates who lost a limb or became seriously wounded in battle were promised a larger share of the loot as a form of compensation for their sacrifice. In some cases, if a pirate was so severely injured that they could no longer perform their duties, they might be left behind on an island, but their rights to compensation were still upheld. This system allowed for a sense of fairness, and it helped to maintain the morale of the crew, knowing that they would be taken care of if they were injured in the line of duty. One of the most important officers on a pirate ship in terms of upholding the pirate code was the quartermaster. The quartermaster was responsible for ensuring that the rules were followed and that the crew was treated fairly. In many cases, the quartermaster was considered more important than the captain, especially when it came to making decisions about the division of loot or resolving disputes among the crew. The quartermaster also had the authority to punish pirates who broke the code, and they were often the ones who decided on punishments for minor infractions such as stealing food or not following orders. The quartermaster was essentially the embodiment of the ship's sense of fairness, and their role was crucial in maintaining order among the crew. Interestingly, pirates weren't always as committed to maintaining their code as they seemed. There were always those who would bend or break the rules for their personal gain, and pirate ships often had to deal with discontent and dissent. This is where the more democratic aspects of pirate governance came into play. If a pirate was dissatisfied with the leadership of the captain or quartermaster, they could voice their concerns, and in some cases, the crew would vote to replace the leader. This form of pirate democracy was a crucial aspect of life on a pirate ship, as it allowed the crew to have a say in their leadership and the direction of their voyages. The pirate code also gave the crew a certain level of autonomy. While the captain had the final say in matters of navigation and strategy, the crew was responsible for voting on more general decisions, such as where to raid next or whether to accept a surrender from an enemy ship. In many ways, the pirate code was a reflection of the egalitarian ideals that many pirates embraced. These men, and sometimes women, had rejected the rigid hierarchies of the Royal Navy and merchant fleets, and they wanted a system that gave them more freedom and control over their lives. This system was far from perfect, and there were certainly tensions within pirate crews, but the fact that pirates had a say in their leadership and their future was a crucial part of their identity. Despite the democratic structure of pirate ships, the reality of pirate life was still brutal and harsh. The code could be enforced with terrifying consequences for those who broke the rules. For example, one of the most infamous punishments for pirates who violated the code was marooning, being left on a deserted island with nothing but a bottle of water and a few supplies. Marooning was a cruel and often fatal punishment, but it was seen as a necessary deterrent to ensure that the crew followed the rules. Even though pirates were technically free men, they understood that breaking the code could lead to a very grim fate. Ultimately, the pirate code was more than just a list of rules. It was a way of life. It governed the pirates' behavior, their interactions with one another, and their pursuit of wealth and adventure. The code helped to create a sense of unity and fairness, even in a world filled with danger and uncertainty. While piracy was far from a utopia, the pirate code provided a sense of structure and organization that allowed pirates to live, work, and survive together on the high seas. The pirate code, with its mix of discipline, democracy, and fairness, remains one of the most fascinating aspects of pirate life. It's easy to imagine that pirates were nothing but savage criminals, but in reality, they were a complex community bound together by shared rules, a commitment to their shipmates, and a fierce determination to survive. Pirates, for all their lawlessness, had a sense of order that was uniquely their own, a sense of order that allowed them to carve out a life on the high seas, even in the face of overwhelming odds. As we venture further into the history of pirates, we now find ourselves at a crucial turning point in the world of piracy, the golden age of piracy's decline. While the idea of pirates has captivated the imagination for centuries, the golden age of piracy, roughly spanning from the late 17th century to the early 18th century, didn't last forever. The very factors that made piracy thrive, unsettled seas' weak enforcement of maritime laws and the constant thirst for wealth, eventually began to work against the pirates. So, how did piracy go from being a thriving, freewheeling enterprise to a fading and marginalized practice? The fall of piracy wasn't due to one single event. Rather, it was a combination of changing political dynamics, improvements in naval warfare, and more organized international law enforcement that slowly and steadily stamped out the pirate way of life. First, we need to understand the forces that contributed to the rise of piracy in the first place. The golden age of piracy was fueled by the relatively unstable nature of global trade during the late 17th and early 18th centuries. European powers like Britain, Spain, France, and the Netherlands were competing for dominance in the Caribbean, the Americas, and parts of Africa. This made it a ripe environment for pirates to take advantage of the valuable trade routes and weakly defended merchant vessels. Pirate ships, with their speed and cunning, could easily outmaneuver the heavily laden merchant ships, which often had precious goods like sugar spices or silver ripe for plundering. Additionally, pirates were able to capitalize on the widespread lack of maritime law enforcement. The vastness of the seas and the many colonies scattered across different parts of the world made it difficult for European navies to patrol and monitor all of the trade routes effectively. This left many ships vulnerable to attack. Pirates didn't just target weak merchant vessels, they also raided poorly defended coastal towns and islands, creating chaos in areas with little to no authority. The result was that pirates were able to make vast amounts of wealth from their raids and lived in an environment that was both lawless and profitable. But then came the turn of the century, and several factors began to change the game for pirates. The first significant shift came in the form of better naval tactics and the rise of well-trained, highly disciplined naval forces. As the European powers recognized the growing threat of piracy, they began to invest more heavily in their naval fleets. These powerful navies began patrolling trade routes more effectively, employing better strategies and more skilled sailors who were determined to wipe out piracy once and for all. One of the most important developments was the rise of naval tactics that were designed specifically to combat pirate ships. Whereas pirates had relied on speed surprise and the element of stealth to overwhelm their targets, the European navies began using more sophisticated strategies like coordinating fleets using advanced gunnery techniques and establishing blockades. The pirates, who had once been the masters of the seas, now found themselves at a disadvantage in terms of firepower and organization. They could no longer rely solely on quick raids and sudden boardings. Naval officers were now trained in naval warfare and had access to the resources to build large, powerful ships capable of overpowering pirate vessels. But it wasn't just the navies that put an end to piracy. The changing political climate also played a role in the decline. At the height of the golden age of piracy, many pirates operated with the support of corrupt or disinterested colonial governments. In fact, some pirates, like the infamous Blackbeard, had letters of marque, legal documents issued by European governments that allowed pirates to attack and plunder enemy ships in times of war. These privateers were in essence legalized pirates, and they were considered valuable assets during times of war. But as the world moved toward peace in the 18th century, the demand for privateers and mercenary sailors decreased. In response to the growing threat of piracy, European powers began cracking down on their colonies' tolerance of pirates, seeking to eliminate any safe havens for pirates to operate from. As a result, pirates found themselves increasingly cornered. The British government, in particular, took a more aggressive stance against piracy, using its growing fleet to search out pirate havens in the Caribbean and along the American coast. British authorities began working together with other nations, creating a united front against pirates. With fewer places to hide and increasingly more enemies on the horizon, pirates found themselves under increasing pressure. The most decisive blow to piracy came in the form of the changing economic structure of the Caribbean. The Caribbean had once been a pirate's playground, where the dense jungles and isolated islands offered ample opportunities to hide and stash loot. But as colonial powers began establishing more permanent settlements, the pirates lost their refuge. They also lost their easy access to treasure, as merchants began to increase their fortifications and military protection, making it more difficult to attack their ships. Pirates, who were once used to the spoils of piracy, were now finding fewer unguarded targets and less wealth to plunder. This shift in the economic landscape essentially dried up the very source of their livelihood. Additionally, a significant number of pirates began to tire of the lifestyle. The toll of constant danger, disease, and infighting eventually caused many pirates to abandon their careers. Many former pirates simply returned to more conventional occupations such as working as sailors in merchant fleets or joining national navies. Others were forced to lay down their arms and accept amnesty from European governments in exchange for their cooperation. The promise of pardon was an effective tactic to reduce the number of active pirates, with many taking the offer to avoid execution or long prison sentences. This trend of amnesty was further strengthened by the fact that piracy was no longer as profitable as it once was. Pirates were finding fewer opportunities for successful raids, and the rise of more stringent maritime law enforcement made life at sea a lot less appealing. It wasn't just a simple matter of pirates being hunted down and wiped out. Piracy also declined due to a lack of interest. In many cases, the once legendary pirates who had thrived in the Golden Age began to fade from the historical record, and piracy lost its allure as a means of survival or wealth. The era of the pirate came to an end when it became a less viable profession. By the mid-18th century, piracy was well on its way out. Some pirates made their final stand in famous battles such as the death of Blackbeard in 1718, but in general the golden age of piracy had come to an end. By the time piracy started to decline, its impact was already deeply felt both on the seas and in popular culture. While pirates were losing their hold over the oceans, their legend lived on in stories, songs, and the books that romanticized their way of life. The decline of piracy didn't signal the end of its cultural relevance. In fact, it set the stage for the enduring image of pirates in our imaginations. However, in terms of real-world piracy, it was clear that the days of the Golden Age were behind them. The forces of law, order, and commerce had triumphed, and the pirate's life was no longer one of freedom and endless adventure. It had become a thing of the past. Ultimately, the decline of piracy was a complex and multifaceted process, one that involved technological advancements, changes in political and economic structures, and shifts in the very nature of piracy itself. The once unstoppable force that had terrorized the seas was eventually defeated by forces outside of its control. Piracy had been a symbol of rebellion and freedom, but in the end, the forces of order and commerce overcame it. The golden age of piracy may have ended, but the myth of the pirate would continue to captivate the world for generations to come. After exploring the decline of piracy, it's time to shift gears and consider the way piracy has been romanticized and shaped in popular culture. From swashbuckling adventure films to Disney's Pirates of the Caribbean, pirates have captured the imagination of countless generations. But how accurate are these depictions, and how did the image of the pirate evolve over time? While the real-life pirate was often a brutal, lawless figure, the pirate in our collective imagination is something entirely different. In this section, we'll explore the fascinating gap between the real pirate life and the way pirates have been portrayed in modern media. The popular image of pirates as adventurous, free-spirited rebels who live for treasure and rum is rooted in a blend of reality and fiction. The pirate as we know him today, the dashing, charismatic figure with a flowing coat eye patch and a sword in hand, owes much of his shape to works of literature from the 19th and 20th centuries. One of the earliest and most influential works in shaping the public's view of pirates was Robert Louis Stevenson's Treasure Island, published in 1883. This novel introduced the world to iconic pirate characters like Long John Silver and Jim Hawkins, and established many of the tropes we associate with pirates today, including the treasure map marked with an X, the wooden leg, and the notion of pirates as both villainous and adventurous. But it wasn't just literature that gave us the pirate image we have today. Hollywood, in particular, has played a huge role in popularizing the idea of pirates as larger-than-life characters. The 1950s and 1960s saw the release of several films that portrayed pirates as romantic, adventurous figures. Movies like Captain Blood, 1935, and The Seahawk, 1940, cemented the image of pirates as charming rebels, often portrayed by charismatic actors like Errol Flynn. These films leaned heavily into the idea of pirates as gallant anti-heroes, thrusting them into swashbuckling sword fights and daring heists in exotic locations. In these films, pirates were rarely shown as the destitute, diseased, and desperate figures they often were in reality. Instead, they were colorful characters, full of bravado, cunning, and charm. But it wasn't until the 21st century that the pirate myth truly reached its peak, with the release of Pirates of the Caribbean, The Curse of the Black Pearl, in 2003. Johnny Depp's portrayal of Captain Jack Sparrow brought pirates into the mainstream, in a way no film before had done. Sparrow, with his swagger, quirky humor, and carefree attitude, became the quintessential modern pirate, a figure who lived for freedom, treasure, and his own strange brand of personal ethics. Depp's performance, though based on the traditions of swashbuckling heroes from earlier films, brought a new anarchic sensibility to the pirate character. The character of Jack Sparrow is a far cry from the grim survivalist pirates of history. His actions are driven by a mix of chaotic good and personal self-interest traits that make him both lovable and unpredictable. Pirates of the Caribbean was a massive cultural phenomenon spawning sequels, merchandise, and an entire theme park attraction. It showcased the full power of the pirate archetype and highlighted the gap between the romanticized, adventure-filled life of a pirate and the grim reality that pirates lived in the 17th and 18th centuries. This portrayal of pirates has had lasting effects, especially in shaping how modern audiences view piracy. The pirate has gone from being a villainous figure to one of the most enduring symbols of freedom, rebellion, and adventure. However, even before Hollywood got its hands on the pirate myth, there was a shift in the way pirates were viewed in literature. The early depictions of pirates in works like Stevenson's Treasure Island presented pirates as both dangerous and fascinating, but over time they began to be seen more as figures of adventure rather than actual criminals. In the early 20th century, the pirate genre in literature was largely shaped by the works of authors like J.M. Barrie, whose Peter Pan, 1904, introduced the world to Captain Hook, another iconic pirate figure. Hook, like Long John Silver, was both villain and symbol of freedom, representing the conflict between order and chaos. The Peter Pan story, which emphasizes eternal childhood and the fantasy of escape, helped to further cement the notion of pirates as figures who lived outside the boundaries of society's rules. This trend continued in the 20th century with the rise of pulp adventure stories, where pirates were often depicted as larger-than-life characters who led daring escapades on the high seas. Their swashbuckling antics and quests for treasure continued to captivate readers, and their image shifted further from that of dangerous criminals to that of adventurers in search of glory. The pirate had evolved into a symbol of freedom from authority, a rebel fighting against the constraints of the established order. The pirate's cultural significance also grew alongside the rise of piracy as a metaphor. Pirates, often portrayed as bold and independent, came to represent rebellion against societal norms and traditional forms of authority. In this way, the pirate became more than just a historical figure. They became a symbol of the anti-establishment movement. The pirate's refusal to conform to rules, his disdain for social conventions, and his pursuit of individual freedom resonated with the counterculture movements of the 1960s and 1970s, further ingraining pirates in the broader cultural imagination. But let's not forget that pirates as figures of rebellion weren't always painted in a positive light. There are instances throughout history where pirates were seen as ruthless, bloodthirsty criminals who threatened the safety and security of trade routes and merchant ships. Their very lifestyle, built on theft, violence, and lawlessness, was viewed with disdain by many. Pirates were hunted down and executed by naval forces for the very actions that modern audiences now romanticize. The pirate figure has always been a symbol of both freedom and danger, a complex blend of traits that make the pirate a compelling character to this day. Yet, As we look at the modern image of the pirate, it's clear that the pirate of today is a far cry from the desperate, violent figures who once roamed the seas. The pirate especially, as portrayed in films like Pirates of the Caribbean, is a character who defies the rules, lives for adventure, and always manages to outwit his enemies. This figure is captivating and charismatic, a symbol of freedom and adventure that allows us to escape from the constraints of our own world. However, as we remember the historical pirates, their struggles for survival, their constant battle against death, and the harsh realities they faced, it's important to recognize the gap between the myth and the reality of piracy. While the pirate of popular culture is largely a product of our collective imagination, he has become more than just a character in a story. The pirate has become a symbol of freedom, rebellion, and the eternal quest for treasure. Even if that treasure is more metaphorical than literal, the pirate's enduring appeal lies in his ability to embody our desire for escape, for breaking free from the shackles of society, and for living life on our own terms. As much as the pirate figure has been romanticized, it's crucial to remember that behind the myth lies a dark history of violence, poverty, and desperation. Pirates were criminals driven by necessity and greed, and their lives were filled with hardship, danger, and death. The pirate that we know today is as much a reflection of our fantasies as it is a product of history. As we continue to embrace the pirate in films, books, and other forms of media, we can enjoy the adventure and excitement he represents. But let's also remember the reality that shaped this myth so that the pirate's legacy can be appreciated in its full complexity. While the pirate's role in popular culture continues to thrive, the impact of their legacy stretches beyond swashbuckling adventures and rum-filled bar brawls. Pirates, despite their violent and tumultuous existence, left a lasting mark on modern society, particularly in the areas of law, trade, and even politics. The actions of pirates and the need for protection against them played a critical role in the evolution of the modern world. From the enforcement of maritime law to the development of international trade routes, piracy shaped the way nations interacted on the global stage and continues to influence modern governance and economy. As we take a step back and reflect on the enduring pirate legacy, we'll explore how their exploits, good or bad, helped lay the groundwork for much of the world as we know it today. To understand the lasting impact of pirates, we need to begin with the legal and political reforms that arose in response to their rampant lawlessness. Pirates, by their very nature, lived outside the law, and in many cases they actively sought to undermine or bypass national and international regulations. Their very presence on the seas exposed weaknesses in the way nations governed maritime activities. As pirates attacked merchant ships, raided coastal towns, and terrorized trade routes, governments were forced to take action. One of the most significant responses to piracy was the development of maritime law. As piracy increased, especially in the Caribbean and along Europe's trading routes, governments were forced to protect their valuable trade assets. European powers like Britain, Spain, France, and the Netherlands began to enforce naval blockades and increase their military presence at sea. They also began to create legal frameworks to prosecute pirates. The infamous Pirate Act, passed by Britain in 1717, which promised death by hanging for pirates, became one of the first serious legal efforts to put an end to piracy. Similar laws were established in other nations to give naval forces the authority to hunt down pirates and punish them accordingly. Beyond criminal punishment, piracy also led to the rise of maritime insurance, a concept that remains relevant to this day. As pirates continually threatened trade merchants needed protection for their valuable cargo. In response, early forms of marine insurance began to emerge. This system allowed merchants to insure their shipments against the risk of being attacked by pirates, giving them some financial cushion if they were unlucky enough to be boarded and looted. It was, in essence, the birth of the modern insurance industry, and it stemmed directly from the need to protect goods from pirate raids. The legal implications of piracy didn't end there, though. Pirates were often seen as an existential threat to the economies of European nations, and their reign of terror led to the creation of treaties between countries aimed at combating piracy and securing trade routes. These treaties laid the foundation for modern international cooperation and trade. Countries recognized the need to work together to protect merchant fleets, which meant establishing clearer rules for shared waters and common borders. The necessity of cooperation between nations in maritime matters forged early examples of international agreements that would later be expanded upon in the context of other global concerns. Pirates also contributed to the growth of military naval power. The efforts to counter piracy and secure vital trade routes led many nations to invest heavily in building formidable naval fleets. The need for more naval ships and better defense mechanisms during the golden age of piracy helped shape the naval tactics that were later refined during conflicts like the Napoleonic Wars and beyond. In many ways, piracy acted as a catalyst for military development at sea, prompting naval officers to innovate in the face of constant threats and attacks. The economic impact of piracy was felt even beyond naval warfare. Piracy disrupted trade in the Americas, the Caribbean, and along the African coast, forcing the development of safer, more efficient ways to transport goods. The creation of convoy systems, where merchant ships traveled in groups for protection, was one such development. This system was eventually adopted by navies across the globe, and it became a cornerstone of global trade. While pirates had disrupted the flow of goods, the lessons learned from dealing with their threat ultimately strengthened international trade practices and created greater cooperation among nations. Even though pirates themselves faded away, their legacy lived on in the ways nations and global economies began to operate. International shipping practices were formalized, and modern security measures, everything from shipping lanes to naval defense, owe their existence in part to the need for safety from piracy. What began as a dangerous outlaw occupation eventually led to more secure trade routes and the development of a more organized and cooperative global economy. It's a rather ironic turn of events. Pirates, originally the chaos makers, helped lay the groundwork for the secure and regulated global economy that we now rely on. Moreover, the pirates' mark on world history is not only confined to the realm of legal reform and international cooperation. Pirates' pursuit of treasure and wealth, while often fueled by greed, also contributed to the spread of wealth around the world. Their raids brought silver, gold, and other valuable commodities into European markets, enriching the trading systems. Some pirates were not just out for gold. Many also became smugglers, trafficking in goods that were otherwise difficult to obtain, or in illegal goods. They played a role in early global capitalism by helping to establish black market trade networks that, though illegal, were integral in connecting parts of the world that were otherwise isolated. Beyond the practical aspects of piracy's legacy, there is also a cultural and symbolic impact. Pirates have long been symbols of rebellion and freedom, and their anti-authoritarian ethos has inspired countless movements and ideals. From the age of revolutions in the 18th century to more contemporary uprisings, pirates have often served as symbols for the fight against oppression and for the pursuit of freedom. This cultural resonance has led to the pirates' enduring presence in popular media, as we've already discussed, and the continued fascination with pirate-themed events and lore. Pirate flags with their skull and crossbones imagery have become symbols not only of danger, but of resistance to the established order. Even today, pirate symbols are used in everything from political protests to pop culture references, symbolizing a willingness to break free from the constraints of society. Pirates also left their mark on literature, art, and music. Many early works about pirates romanticize their lives and adventures, emphasizing the excitement and danger of living outside the law. These works helped to create a lasting myth of piracy that has carried over into our modern world, whether through novels like Treasure Island, or the ballads sung by sailors of old, the legend of pirates has continued to evolve, capturing the human imagination and embodying themes of freedom, rebellion, and treasure hunting. While the pirate lifestyle might no longer exist in its original form, the symbolism of the pirate daring fearless and living on the edge remains a powerful and enduring image. Their legacy, both practical and symbolic, has had a profound effect on the way we view freedom law and even modern-day crime. The pirates of the Golden Age, for all their violence and lawlessness, have influenced everything, from international law and trade to the symbols of resistance that continue to inspire modern-day rebels. It's a curious, ironic, and somewhat poetic outcome that pirates in all their chaos played a part in creating the more structured, organized world we live in today. As we come to the final chapter in our exploration of piracy's history, we slow the pace and reflect on the lasting impact pirates have had on modern society. Despite their relatively short-lived reign as marauders of the high seas, pirates continue to influence the world in ways both subtle and profound. From the laws of the sea to our modern cultural expressions, the pirate's legacy is woven into the very fabric of our history. But as we examine the end of piracy as a dominant force on the oceans, we find a soft yet striking conclusion to this tale. By the time piracy began its decline in the mid-18th century, the world had changed drastically. European powers had tightened their control over their colonies. Navies had become more efficient and powerful, and global trade had been transformed into a highly regulated system. Pirates, once kings of the seas, were now hunted down by the very navies they had once outsmarted. Some met their ends through execution, others through imprisonment, and some simply faded into obscurity as the allure of treasure hunting gave way to the realities of surviving in a rapidly modernizing world. But while piracy was officially stamped out as an organized and widespread threat, the idea of piracy, rebellion, freedom, and the lust for treasure remained alive in the hearts of many. Even as the pirate ships were destroyed, the stories, the myths, and the legends they left behind took root in the cultural imagination. The golden age of piracy may have ended, but the echoes of those daring, dangerous days still reverberate through history and into our collective consciousness. Pirates, especially those from the Golden Age, have taken on a mythical quality in the stories told about them. Whether it's the infamous Blackbeard, with his wild, terrifying presence, or Anne Bonny and Mary, read the fearless women who broke all the norms of piracy. These figures continue to live on in our imagination. Their larger-than-life personalities and their seemingly endless quest for treasure and freedom have captured the imagination of countless generations. Their stories have been immortalized in books, movies, and songs, adding to the legend of what it meant to live as a pirate. One of the most intriguing aspects of this legacy is the fact that pirates were often seen as symbols of freedom. They lived outside the law, rejecting the constraints of society, and many pirates believed they were fighting for a more egalitarian world. Pirate ships operated under a kind of loose democracy, where every crew member had a say in the division of spoils and key decisions. The pirate code was in many ways an early experiment in self-governance and shared responsibility. For those living under the heavy hand of monarchy or colonial rule, pirates represented a chance to escape from the rigid structures of society and live life on their own terms. In many ways, the pirate was a figure of rebellion, not only against the law, but against a world that seemed unjust and oppressive. But as we shift from the romanticized notion of pirates to a more modern understanding, it's important to note the complex reality of their lives. Pirates were not just freedom fighters. They were criminals, often motivated by greed, survival, and the harsh realities of life at sea. Their actions were brutal, and their exploits often led to death and destruction. The very essence of piracy was violence, attacking and plundering ships fighting to survive, and sometimes even killing for the mere pursuit of wealth. In examining the pirate legacy, We also see how piracy influenced the development of maritime law. As we've already discussed, piracy led to the creation of legal frameworks that governed trade shipping and naval engagement. The development of maritime law as we know it today can be traced back to efforts to curb piracy and protect the growing global trade system. Countries came together to establish treaties and agreements that made piracy a criminal offense, with severe punishments for those who violated the law. These agreements laid the groundwork for the complex system of international trade and maritime law that now governs our oceans. Piracy's threat led to the modernization of naval tactics and the birth of organized naval forces that were far more efficient and disciplined than the ragtag pirate fleets of the past. Even the very concept of the pirate haven has had a lasting influence on modern politics, as pirates often operated from isolated islands or remote coastal regions. Their actions highlighted the vulnerability of ungoverned territories. The establishment of modern regulated trade routes and port cities can be seen as a direct response to the need for better control over maritime spaces. In a sense, pirates contributed to the creation of the global shipping networks that we rely on today. Their attacks on merchant ships forced governments to improve the security and organization of trade systems, which ultimately shaped the global economy. In more recent years, the image of the pirate has undergone yet another transformation. While pirates once symbolized rebellion against the state and law, the modern pirate is often portrayed in a very different light. In the late 20th and early 21st centuries, piracy once again made headlines, but this time the pirates were seen as a menace to international shipping. Modern pirates, particularly off the coast of Somalia and in the Strait of Malacca, have continued the legacy of piracy, but in a more violent and organized manner. The piracy of today, while often motivated by economic hardship rather than adventure, still echoes the same themes of rebellion and lawlessness that defined their predecessors. Yet even in this modern context, the pirate has not lost his mythical appeal. In popular media, pirates continue to be portrayed as figures of charm and daring, even in the face of their criminality. Modern movies, video games, and TV shows continue to romanticize the pirate lifestyle, mixing the brutal realities with the appeal of adventure. This blend of myth and reality has made the pirate a figure that continues to intrigue us even in the 21st century. The iconic Jolly Roger flag with its skull and crossbones still represents defiance, independence, and a certain rebellious spirit. So as we bring this story to a close, it's important to remember that the pirate legacy is one of complexity. Pirates were not just the villains of history, nor were they purely romanticized heroes. They were a product of their time, shaped by economic, social, and political factors, and their lives were often brutal, short, and full of hardship. And yet, despite the violence and lawlessness, pirates still capture our imagination. Their stories speak to something fundamental in us, the desire for freedom, for adventure, and for something greater than the rigid structures that govern our lives. Their legacy, however flawed, continues to inspire and provoke, reminding us of a time when the seas were wild, the law was a distant concept, and the spirit of rebellion reigned. As you reflect on the history of piracy, remember that while the world of the pirate may have faded into the past, its impact lingers on in the very systems that govern our world today. The pirate may no longer sail the high seas, but his spirit in all its complexity continues to shape the way we think about freedom, law, and rebellion. So, next time you hear the rattle of a ship's timbers or feel the spray of the sea on your face, think of those who sailed before chasing adventure, fortune, and freedom on the open waters. The pirate in all his forms will always be a part of our shared history. As we settle into the final moments of this journey, let's slow the pace even more. Picture yourself once again on the open sea, the gentle rocking of the ship beneath you as the sun dips low on the horizon. The salty breeze wraps around you, soft and soothing, and the last remnants of daylight flicker on the water, reflecting a gentle glow. there's a quiet hum like a lullaby of waves lapping against the hull with the occasional creak of wood and the soft flutter of sails. The world feels expansive yet peaceful, as though everything has finally fallen into place. We've traveled through history, the lives of pirates, their battles, their treasure, their myths, and their legacy. But now it's time to relax into the present moment, letting go of the tumult of their world and embracing the calm. The seas may have once been wild, and the pirate's life filled with chaos and uncertainty. But here, in this moment, you're free to let your mind drift just like the ship floating in the calm after the storm. As you rest now, surrounded by the quiet sounds of the sea, you can take comfort in knowing that these stories, though filled with struggle and adventure, were all part of the larger flow of history. The echoes of the pirate spirit may still be with us in different forms, but right now, it's time to let that energy fade softly into the background. Let your breath slow the gentle swaying of the ship, matching the rise and fall of your chest. Close your eyes and allow yourself to ease into sleep, letting go of all the hustle of the day. Whether the pirate life was a bold adventure or a cruel struggle for you tonight, it's a journey that's now at rest. The story has ended, and it's time to drift into your own peaceful waters, as calm as the sea beneath a starry night sky. Sweet dreams.